I want to give a special shout out to Christy. You know who you are. You sent me a message on Messenger Thursday evening with this information as it was breaking, and I appreciate that. Because this is devastating for a lot of people and deeply concerning for the rest of us. I don't normally bring you a video on a Saturday, but this needed to get out to you now. Because it's going to shape how we move through 2027 and potentially beyond. On Thursday, August 13th, Tyson Foods, the largest beef processor in the United States, sent letters to workers at its Joslin, Illinois plant telling them their job duties would end that same day. Not next month. Not next week. That day. 2,500 union workers at a plant that had operated in the Quad Cities region for 43 years found out and were finished within hours of each other. Cameras outside the plant caught a line of cars leaving the parking lot about 30 minutes after the announcement. People were driving away from careers that in some cases spanned decades. An Illinois senator called it a devastating blow for Northwest Illinois. State officials said it was especially painful for the 2,500 skilled union workers affected, at a time when families are already struggling with the cost of living. And Tyson didn't stop there. On the same day, they confirmed they're closing their Eagle Mountain, Utah facility to another 800 to 1,200 jobs, and that they're pursuing a sale of their Pasco, Washington facility, which processes roughly 2,000 head of cattle a day. More workers, more uncertainty. So today I want to walk through the whole story, because this isn't one thing. It's who is affected, why Tyson says this is happening, what it means for the structure of America's beef supply, and what it means for the price of ground beef on your receipt this fall and winter, into next year. These aren't separate stories. They're the same story, and understanding it will change how you think about your grocery bill for the rest of 2026 and into 2027. Before I get into supply chains and pricing, I want to sit with the human side of this for a minute. Because when we talk about industry restructuring and processing capacity, it's easy to forget that Thursday was somebody's last day at a job they'd held for 15, 20, 25 years and they were let go the way most of us toss out a scrap of paper. The Joslin, Illinois plant has been part of the Quad Cities economy since 1983. That's 43 years. The Quad Cities region straddles Illinois and Iowa along the Mississippi River, an industrial, agricultural community, where a job at the meatpacking plant isn't a stepping stone. It's a career. It's a mortgage. It's a family's financial foundation. The Quad Cities Chamber of Commerce estimates the plant employed around 2,700 people. State officials cite 2,500 union workers. Either way, a single employer closure of that size creates an immediate, profound economic shock, not just for those workers, but for every business that depends on their spending. What makes this closure so jarring is the timeline. Tyson sent the letter on August 13th, saying most job duties would end that day or the next. There was no wind down, no months of preparation, no gradual transition. The letter arrived and the plant stopped. The ripple effects go far beyond direct employees, the trucking companies hauling cattle to the facility, the suppliers of packaging and cleaning materials, the restaurants and shops near the plant where workers spent their paychecks, even the school districts that relied on the property tax revenue. When a plant this size closes, the impact multiplies through the entire region. The president and CEO of the Quad Cities Chamber of Commerce called it difficult news for the region, particularly for the families affected, while noting the area is resilient and supported by a diverse mix of industries. That's the optimistic framing. The realistic one is that thousands of families just lost their primary in some households, their only source of income. Then there's Eagle Mountain, Utah. That's a case-ready beef facility, also closing. Tyson invested $300 million to build it back in 2019, 7 years ago, designed to employ 800 workers with room to grow to 1,200. 7 years old, and that investment is being written off. Gone. The Pasco, Washington facility, which processes around 2,300 cattle a day, is being put up for sale, not shut down outright. But its future now depends entirely on whether a buyer steps in and what they intend to do with it. And here's the one you might have missed. Tyson also closed its Lexington, Nebraska plant earlier this year, cutting 3,200 jobs. That closure connects directly to this week's announcement. Nebraska, Illinois, Utah, Washington, these aren't isolated events. They're the same trend playing out across the map. These are families in the Quad Cities who had plans for September now scrambling. These are workers in Lexington who already went through this months ago. These are communities that built their economic lives around facilities that no longer exist. and aren't coming back.
Now let's talk about why Tyson says this is happening, because their explanation is specific, grounded in USDA data, and connects directly to everything I've been covering since May. Here's Tyson's own language from their August 13th press release. They're creating a more competitive footprint amid one of the most historic cattle shortages the country has ever experienced. That's it. The cattle aren't there to process. They cited USDA cattle inventory data showing continued limited heifer retention and said those supply constraints are likely to persist, requiring strategic action. Let's break that down. One of the most historic cattle shortages the country has ever experienced is not hyperbole from a company trying to justify layoffs. It's backed by the USDA's own numbers, which I covered in the WASTE breakdown earlier this week. The U.S. cattle herd as of January 2026 was at its lowest level since the 1950s. USDA Secretary Rollins confirmed 86.2 million head of cattle and calves, the lowest in decades. The most recent July inventory data showed roughly 94.2 million total head, with beef cows at 28.5 million, down 1% year over year, and the 2026 calf crop at 32.5 million, down 2%. Over the past decade, the U.S. has lost more than 17% of its cattle ranchers. Fewer beef cows means fewer calves. Fewer calves means fewer cattle reaching feedlots and processing plants 6 to 18 months from now. This is a biological constraint. It doesn't respond quickly to market signals no matter how much anyone wants it to. Limited heifer retention is the key phrase to hold on to because it tells you how long this shortage is going to last. A heifer is a young female that hasn't yet had a calf. When producers hold heifers back instead of sending them to slaughter, they're rebuilding the breeding herd, choosing future production over current production. When heifer retention stays limited, it means the herd isn't rebuilding yet, and the shortage isn't entering a recovery phase. Tyson's own language here mirrors what agricultural economists at Oklahoma State and Texas A&M have been saying all summer. Meaningful herd rebuilding hasn't even begun. If it hasn't started, we can't be looking at an 18-month turnaround. Now look at what this shortage is doing to Tyson's own numbers, because they tell the story better than I can. Tyson's beef segment posted an adjusted operating loss of $138 million in Q3 2026, compared to a $116 million loss in Q3 2025. The losses are getting worse. The projected full-year loss for the beef segment in fiscal 2026 is $500 million. 3 quarters in, they've already lost $701 million operating. Beef volume is down 16% year over year, while the average beef selling price is up 12% year over year, and they're still losing money. Read those two numbers together. Tyson is selling 16% less beef, charging 12% more for what it does sell, and still can't turn a profit. Because the cattle themselves cost more than the company can recover at wholesale. This isn't a management failure. This is a supply constraint severe enough that the largest beef processor in the country can't run its own plant network profitably. Now for the part most headlines are skipping: what happens when 4 companies control 85% of beef processing. Tyson, JB's, Cargill, and National Beef control roughly 83 to 85% of all U.S. beef processing capacity. That concentration has been building for decades, about 25% in 1977, 71% by 1992, 85% by 2025. 2 of those 4, JB's and National Beef, are owned by the Brazilian company Marfrig, as the Department of Justice noted in its May 2026 antitrust press conference. Decisions about the structure of America's beef supply are increasingly being made by executives overseas. This creates a squeeze on both ends. When 4 companies control 85% of processing, ranchers have very few places to sell their cattle and oligopsony, many sellers and few buyers, which gives the buyers pricing power over producers. At the same time, when those same 4 companies control most of the beef reaching grocery stores, consumers have very few real options at the counter. The system is structured to pay producers less than a competitive market would, while charging shoppers more than a competitive market would. That's the core allegation behind the DOJ antitrust investigation opened May 4th, 2026, examining possible price fixing and collusion among the Big Four. I'm not rendering a verdict, the investigation is ongoing, but the structural concern. That 85% concentration in a critical food supply chain creates fragility on both sides isn't a fringe argument. It's the explicit concern of the DOJ, the USTA secretary, and university agricultural economists across the country. Here's the number from Thursday I want you to sit with. Stevens Inc., a financial analysis firm, estimated in a research brief that Tyson has now cut its beef slaughter capacity by roughly 50% since announcing the Lexington closure last year across Lexington, Joslyn, Eagle Mountain, and Pasco combined. One of the four companies that control 85% of U.S. beef processing has just removed about half of its own capacity from the system, with Tyson consolidating down to 3 plants: Dakota City, Nebraska, Holcomb, Kansas, and Amarillo, Texas, and Pasco possibly going to an unknown buyer. The geographic footprint of U.S. beef processing is shrinking and concentrating further into the central United States. Think about what that means the next time there's a pandemic. A cyber attack like the one that hit JBS in 2021 and knocked out 20% of U.S. beef production overnight, a weather event, or a disease outbreak. A 2019 fire at a single Tyson facility in Kansas temporarily wiped out roughly 6% of national beef processing capacity, and the 2021 JBS ransomware attack disrupted a substantial share of production. Both caused immediate, sharp price spikes at the retail counter. Now the system is more geographically concentrated than it was during either of those events, not less, which means the vulnerability to a single disruption has gone up, not down. So what does Thursday's announcement actually mean for the price of beef at your grocery store? My honest answer is more nuanced than either the alarming or the reassuring version, because there's truth on both sides. Tyson says closing Joslyn, Eagle Mountain, and Pasco lets them maintain a similar level of cattle harvesting across a more efficient, modern network, with Dakota City, Holcomb, and Amarillo absorbing what Joslyn used to handle, and Amarillo, which had been down to 1 shift, going back up to 2. If that holds up, the closures wouldn't represent a direct cut to how much beef the U.S. can process on any given day, just a consolidation of where that processing happens.